Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. My name is John Edward Weiss. I am one of the 50 ambassadors for the United States of America, the Republic of the United States of America. And I'm representing the free state of Iowa. A little bit about Clyde. Clyde ran for governor as a libertarian in 2002. In 1997, he helped start the first constitutional study group in Jefferson County, Iowa. His consistent educational efforts helped Ron Paul achieve his first county victory in the 2008 primary. Clyde stayed active in the 2008 campaign and was elected to the Republican State Platform Committee in Des Moines. In 2009, he was elected as one of the 3 delegates to represent Iowa at the Continental Congress held in St. Charles, Illinois. He has written 2 books, Restoring the Heart of America with Ed Noyes and Common Sense Revisited, of which you've received a copy. This has been read by at least 100,000 people nationwide. Both of his books have been supported by Ron Paul and G. Edward Griffin. Clyde has had a successful 39-year career as an entrepreneur with 6 companies that have reached a minimum of 40 employees and $10 million in annual sales. He also has been a general partner in 22 limited partnerships. His current company works with 100 financial service agents with total sales of over $130 million per year. He has been married for 40 years, has 4 children, and 6 grandchildren. So I would like you to please give a warm welcome to Clyde Cleveland. Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming. This is some exciting and inspiring and very important material we're going to be covering tonight about our country. I do want to say that there's a difference between our country and our government. I love our country. Our government would be fine as long as it was following the founding principles our country was based on, which it is not. So, you know, if you hear me criticizing or being negative about the government, remember that it's a whole different thing than our country. So we'll be talking a lot. Hopefully you'll learn some things tonight. I'll be talking for about an hour. I'll go through the PowerPoint presentation. If you could just write down your questions if you have questions. I love questions, but if you could wait until I'm done, that would be great. It goes a lot quicker that way. So it's exciting for me because I'm talking about something I love, which is freedom and liberty and the founding principles of our country. And I know the solutions to our problems in this country, virtually every problem, would be to go back and revitalize those principles and be in tune with those principles again. Okay, so anyway, I wrote Common Sense Revisited about 3 years ago when I saw Ron Paul on TV in the debates being maligned by the other candidates and being maligned by the Master of Ceremonies and just speaking truth to power, and it just inspired me so much. That I thought if he could do that at 74 years old, the least I can do is write this knowledge that's in my head that's been there for a long time and share it with people and try to create what I call a paradigm shift to liberty. And that's exactly what Thomas Paine did. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is government. We're going to talk about indigenous power versus surrogate power, bottom-up versus top-down government, how we can return our government to the laws of nature and of nature's God, which is what our founders described as the source of our inherent rights, of our indigenous power, and how the Republic of the United States, this movement to re-inhabit the original Republic of the United States, could be a wonderful solution to the problems that have been facing us for a long time. Thomas Paine, let's talk about him and what he did. It's amazing what he did. How many of you have read Common Sense by Thomas Paine? Okay, you need to go back and read that because that changed our country. Without Common Sense by Thomas Paine, Declaration of Independence would not have been signed. It's really that simple. Because in January of 1776, Jefferson and Adams and Franklin were very concerned that the Continental Congress was not going to support our troops in Boston that were already there fighting the British. And they took a poll of the delegates at the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, and 75% were going to vote, if they would have voted then, to get back with England. So, and the war was already going, and the people that were fighting needed the support of the Congress and needed a Declaration of Independence. They all knew that they needed this declaration. Without it, they didn't feel like it was legitimate, what they were doing. So that was the situation in January. So Adams and Franklin and Jefferson postponed the vote because they wanted to keep working on the delegates. In the meantime, about 2 weeks after that happened, Thomas Paine's book came out, and 50,000 copies were sold in a few days. A few days later, another 50,000 were sold, and then another 50, and another 100,000. Some estimates put it at 500,000 copies sold in a country of 2.5 million people. It was amazing what happened there. And, oh, by the way, the reason I'm here, I forgot about this. These are my kids and my grandkids. The reason I'm here tonight is because I want to see these kids grow up in a free country. Aren't those granddaughters cute? It drives me crazy. I see them every day, and I just can't stay away from them. But anyway, by April of 1776, General Washington wrote in a personal letter that by private letters which I have lately received from Virginia, I find common sense is working a powerful change there in the minds of men. In other words, this booklet, what it did is it created a paradigm shift in the psychology and the consciousness of the nation. And what it did was it explained what their indigenous power was, what we call indigenous power. What Paine put it in terms of who has the power, the government or the kings and queens or the people, the individual person. And he very eloquently and clearly stated that an individual who is created by a creator has these inherent rights, free will, and the right to use that free will. We're the creators through our creator. So we have this indigenous power. It's indigenous to us. It's the only true, legitimate source of power on the planet, the individuals. And what individuals do, and when we need to lend some of our power, we could call it, to some institution, whether it be a partnership agreement or a corporation or a company or a government, we're creating a surrogate that we're loaning some of our power to. But that surrogate has no indigenous power. It's only the power that the individuals who create the surrogate are giving to it or loaning to it. And so when we create a surrogate, we create a partnership agreement, or we create a corporate bylaws or corporate charter or a constitution, if it's a government, and we expect the surrogate, the people who are running that surrogate, to stay within the boundaries of that agreement. So where does all this come from? This is one of my favorite quotes from the founders. The principles on which we engaged, of which the charter of our independence is the record, were sanctioned by the laws of our being, and we but obeyed them in pursuing undeviatingly the course they called for. Thomas Jefferson in 1809. In other words, all of this comes from an understanding of laws of nature and of nature's God, is what they called it. And the laws of our being, as Jefferson referred to it. In other words, higher law. The difference between our country's government, and every other country on the planet is that our laws are based in higher law. They're not based in man-made law, which can change constantly. Whoever the ruler is, they get to change it. It's also called ruler's law. This is inherent natural law, common law, it's based on natural rights. So our founders saw these truths as self-evident, and common sense concludes that any rational thinking being is unique because they have free will and the ability to manifest thoughts into concrete forms through action. Indigenous power. The other kind of power is surrogate power. The surrogate is our servant, and understanding the difference between those two is absolutely critical. And our founders understood that, and we don't in this country anymore because we're not educated in what this all means. It's not in our educational system. It's not in the media. We just don't learn this. And it's absolutely critical that we do learn it. So, the only true source of power is the individual. Declaring indigenous power is the first step to recapturing the power that has been usurped by any surrogate. I want you to understand the founders understood this concept very, very clearly. That's why they wanted a declaration. They knew that declaring their indigenous power would be the first step in their victory and the necessary step for them to take. So they really wanted that declaration. And the founders knew that they had to do this. The ones that, I think more than anything, what's become clear to me in my study is that they were waiting to see if the people were totally behind it before they signed their name to that declaration, because they knew that they would be considered traitors as soon as they signed that and subject to being hung by the English. But that's what happened in that 5-6 month period from January of 1776 to July. That paradigm shift was created. Enough people realized and became cognizant of their indigenous power. The people in the Continental Congress realized that it was inevitable that we would win, and so they felt comfortable on July 2nd to go ahead and agree and vote unanimously for the Declaration of Independence. On the 4th, they signed it. Now, so, the founders, July 4th. Let's just go through these words for just a minute. Now that we have an understanding of indigenous and surrogate power, let's look at those words in the first 2 paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence again and see how clearly they understood this concept. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. They're stating the source of their indigenous power. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. They're also stating the importance of declaring their indigenous power. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are just some of the natural inherent rights that we have as created human beings. And again, they're stating the source, that are endowed by our Creator. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. In other words, a surrogate is created in order to protect our rights, deriving their just powers, again, from the consent of the governed. In other words, that surrogate is deriving its power from us, the individuals. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. What could be more clear? What they were stating is, we're going to create this surrogate now. We're going to get rid of the one surrogate because they've usurped our indigenous power. We're going to create a new one, surrogate, and as long as that surrogate minds its manners and it minds the charter and the Constitution that we're going to create, then we'll keep it. But if it doesn't, then we're going to alter it, change it, or abolish it. It's an amazing document, and it's the cornerstone of our founding documents. Now, what did they create? What they created was not a democracy, but a republic. And this is something that very few Americans understand today, because we've been told over the last 100 years that we're a democracy. We are not a democracy. We're a republic. And a republic, the difference is the republic will protect individual rights. A democracy is 3 wolves and a sheep sitting down to dinner and deciding who they're going to eat. That is a democracy. It's mob rule. And the founders knew this, so they created a republic with all these protections for individual liberties and individual rights, and all these ways of keeping government from growing and becoming corrupt and too big and too powerful. That was their intent. Now, the only kind of government entity that can do that is one where indigenous power is supreme, and that's where the individuals have the power, and that's with a bottom-up, what I call bottom-up government. Now, in attributes of a bottom-up organization, any organization, I want to make a couple points here. I'm going to talk actually about a couple of companies. Any organization that uses these principles will be successful beyond belief, because it's human nature is whatever organizational structure they're in, whether it's a government or a company or a nonprofit organization or a club, it doesn't matter. If human beings are allowed to use their free will, it's like a muscle. If they're allowed to exercise their free will, they'll be stronger. It's like all their creativity and their intelligence and their power is able to be used in such an organization. And there are examples of companies that have done this. Gore and Associates is one. Amazing company where they just allow people to come in. They're all associates. There's no employers, employees. Management level doesn't really exist. A brand new person coming in can negotiate his way into any part of the company. It's really a series of hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurial companies within the overall company. One of the largest privately held companies on the planet. Never borrowed money, never raised money. It's a privately held company where everyone is engaged in part of the profit structure. And multi-billion-dollar company. They make Gore-Tex boots and all those things. You've heard of them, right? Gore and Associate, Gore-Tex boots and jackets and all that.
How do you spell that?
G-O-R-E.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Another company recently that has done the same thing is this Semco that Tom Peters just wrote a book about called Maverick down in Brazil. They allowed the employees to have say in everything that is done with the company. The employees asked for 23.5% of the profits. That's what they came up with. They felt that would be fair. The company gave that to them. Everybody's an owner now. Everybody's an associate. There are no employees and managers, and that company is taken off. People are coming from all over the world to see how they've done it. Now, the company I want to talk about, sort of the leader in this whole area, is Visa. You've all heard of Visa, Visa card. Visa card started out as Bank of America card. And Bank of America in the late 60s had no idea what to do with their credit card company because credit cards were a fledgling industry there. Nobody had any idea that it would even take off. And they were looking for somebody to take over that division. A fellow by the name of D. Hock took it over. Dee wrote a book called Birth of the Chaotic Age about what he did at Visa. But basically, he implemented a bottom-up organizational structure in Visa that resulted within 12 years of Bank of America card becoming Visa. They changed the name to Visa, and it became the largest commercial enterprise on planet Earth with $1.5 trillion in revenue in just a few years. It was an amazing story. And what he does in this book is he talks about these fundamental principles. And I'm going to compare these to certain government principles in just a minute. So pay attention to the list and we'll compare them, see how similar they are. It must not attempt to impose uniformity. It should be open to all qualified participants. Power, function, and resources should be distributed to the maximum degree. In other words, pushing power and authority to the furthest limits of the organization possible. No interest should be able to dominate deliberations or control decisions, particularly management. To the maximum degree possible, everything should be voluntary, non-coercion. It should introduce, not compel, change. And it should be infinitely malleable, yet extremely durable. So those were the fundamental principles that D. Hock, he actually talks about how he observed nature, and that's how he came up with these principles, principles of natural law. Now, when the founders were talking about how to structure their government, they looked at examples from Greece and Rome and all the different civilizations. And the two that they liked best were the Anglo-Saxons and early Israel under Moses. They really liked that structure. And in 5,000 Year Leap, Cleon Skousen talks about those two civilizations, and he lists the attributes of both of them. Look at this list and how similar it is to what you just saw. Equal representation, unalienable rights of the individual, local resolution of problems to the maximum extent possible. Few laws, those that did exist, were well known by the people. A justice system based on complete reparation to the person who had been wronged. Organized into small groups in which every adult had a voice and a vote. And family units of 10, with each of those units of 10 with an elected leader, and then 5 units of those 10 groups in a group of 50 families with an elected leader, and so on. That's how they did it. So it created a bottom-up organization where the power was coming at the base of this pyramid here you're seeing, starting there with the individual, with the family, with the local group of 10 and 50 and so on, and working its way up to where Moses really had very little to do once he set this structure up. So that was the bottom-up structure. Both the Anglo-Saxons and the early Israelites had that, and it worked very, very, very well. So what our forefathers ended up with is a structure that was based on this, where individuals and families were at the base. That's where the power was. Townships and civic organizations is where virtually all problems were solved. The state government had very little to do and was restricted by its constitution, its state constitution, and the federal government was even more restricted by certain enumerated powers that it was supposed to stay within. So that's how it worked. And it worked so well that by 1905, the United States was 6% of the landmass of the world and 5% of the population of the world, ended up producing, producing almost over 50% of almost everything. Luxuries, clothing, food, everything. And more people came here from other countries than any other planet in the history of the planet, or any other country in the history of the planet, yeah. So, and that figure is from Cleon Skousen and 5,000-Year Leap. In other words, it created incredible prosperity, incredible freedom. Again, it's just simple, basic, fundamental principles of human nature and what happens when people are free and allowed to develop their full potential. So what happened? In the last 100 years, this thing has been completely flipped upside down, where we now have the federal government telling us what kind of toilets we can put in our house, what kind of light bulbs we can have to put in our house. Now with the new Food Safety Act, whether or not we can grow a greenhouse and who we can sell our greenhouse products to. It's all under the control of the federal government now, that we can't have bake sales in our public schools, and on and on and on. And there's many, many examples, but it's just over the top, and it's complete upside down of what was originally the plan in this country. When Tocqueville came here in 1820s and he wrote Democracy in America, he spent 9 years studying America, going to communities. And what struck him was that he said government was invisible. Government had nothing to do with people's lives. But every single person he met belonged to at least 6 to 7 different groups. Service organizations, nonprofit organizations, all these groups that would improve life within the community. And that's where problems were handled. Substance abuse and welfare and just about everything else you can think of was handled with non-coercive, non-force-based, voluntary organizations. And that's what impressed him about America. Bottom up. So, obviously, we need to get back to that. And by the way, this shift has occurred for several reasons, but one is just the natural tendency of power to coalesce and concentrate over time, and especially if the individuals who create these surrogates aren't vigilant, aren't watching all the time, this is what happens. The surrogate will use its power to grow its own power more and more and more, and become out of control. So what we need to do, and also top-down management is always based, and behind that is always brute force. So it's time to flip that power paradigm, power pyramid back. And what I'm excited about, because I've been involved in this movement for 25 years, is that finally somebody's solved the problem of how we do this in a way that really, I think, can work and really has momentum behind it. Because what the Republic of the United States is all about is re-inhabiting the original republic. Since the original republic was formed, 40 million laws, approximately, have been created at the state and federal level. 40 million laws. How do you deal with that? How do you undo all that? Well, the beauty about the republic is that we're going back to the Constitution as it was created. So everything that's happened since then is wiped out. All the damage that's been done to our bottom-up structure that was created in 1787 is wiped off the chart, which is very powerful. Federal Reserve doesn't exist in the Republic. Income tax doesn't exist in the Republic. So instead of trying to undo all this damage that's been done bit by bit, we just start over again in essence. So I just want to review one more time a little bit about the nature of bottom-up versus top-down, because it's really important to understand this. Because once you understand this, you understand how every single problem that we have can be better solved in this manner. So, top-down versus bottom-up. Whenever force has to be used, whenever you have a top-down structure, and you have, and it's like this, and they're trying to control everything that's happening down here, even to the local level, like forcing us to use a certain light bulb or a toilet or whatever. How does that force, what kind of emotion does it create in the society? Fear, right? It's fear-based. And so fear is a predominant emotion in society. In a bottom-up society, it's all about the individual and the family. The family unit is a basic structure, which is what holds that family together is love. So it's love versus fear. It's freedom versus control. It's non-coercion versus force. It's local control versus centralized planning. It's abundant creativity versus stifled creativity. It's optimism versus despair. It's strong families versus breakdown of families. And it's personal responsibility versus dependence. Universal opportunity versus concentrated power. And ultimately, prosperity versus poverty. So, what we do, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's pretty obvious from what I'm saying here that we can solve problems better if the people within a group are using more of their potential. More creativity, more of their potential. And the top-down model restricts that. And all problems in society can be better solved with more of their inner power and intelligence within that environment of harmony and cooperation. So what we do in the rest of Common Sense Revisited, which I'm not going to spend much time on right now, is we go through several different areas of society. We go through economics and the monetary system, welfare, education, healthcare, environment, drugs, defense and foreign relations. We go through all those different things and explain how bottom-up solutions are working better where they're being implemented than top-down solutions. So I invite you to read that. Not going to spend a whole lot more time on that. I do want to mention just a couple of things about monetary policy, a couple of things on welfare and environment, just to give you kind of an example. First of all, this is one of the, I think, most important quotes, and it's most, and very important to, and pertinent to what's going on in our country today. This is from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson. All the perplexities, confusion, and distress in America arise not from defects in the Constitution or Confederation, not from want of honor or virtue, so much as from downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation. It's a key fundamental area that we are ignorant of in this country. We don't understand money. We don't understand how it works. We don't understand what the government and Federal Reserve have done to us and to our money. Very few people understand this. And it's absolutely essential that we do. One of the few people in government, maybe the only person in government, that really understands it is Ron Paul. And he's now the head in Congress of the Monetary Committee that is supposed to supervise the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has never been audited in almost 100 years of its existence. Ron Paul had a bill a couple of years ago, and up until last year, with over 300 co-signers to audit the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is so powerful, they were able to halt that. They were able to keep that from happening. But they had to agree to a partial audit. Well, that partial audit came out a few weeks ago. And the knowledge of that, the information that came out of that was absolutely devastating. And the media has not covered it at all. And in essence, what happened is that it was found that over the last few years, last 2-3 years, the Federal Reserve has given away $12 trillion without any government approval whatsoever, without government knowledge, congressional approval, president approval at all. And where did it go? Well, we got a partial list. It was to other central banks, foreign central banks, other countries, governments, corporations, some in America, some in foreign countries. In other words, they've given away $12 trillion of our money. They've created that money. When they create money, when they create new money, that makes the money that we have worth less. So they've basically shifted wealth from us and our families in this country to people that they're connected with. Now, $12 trillion is a whole lot of money. It's 12,000 billion. In other words, they could pick out their 12,000 favorite friends throughout the world and give them each $1 billion. This to try to give you some idea. $1 trillion, $1 trillion is all the money that our country collects in income taxes in 1 year. 700 billion caused almost a revolution in this country when they did that, when Congress had to pass that first bailout. 95% of the letters and phone calls to congressmen from both Democrats and Republicans all over the country was against that bailout. But they still passed it. And what they had to do to pass it is create another 250 billion of bribery, pork, for the ones who were against it. That's how they did it. $1 trillion was created there, and the country almost revolted. The Federal Reserve, I want to say it one more time, gave away $12 trillion without anybody even knowing about it. People should be revolting in the streets over this. Okay. So I'm going to skip that. A lot of this goes back to the international bankers. It goes back to Jekyll Island. The Federal Reserve was created in this room. This is a picture was taken in May of 2009 with me and G. Edward Griffin, who wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island, A Second Look at the Federal Reserve. A very, very important work that every American should read, because it explains who the international banking families are, who their representatives were. This is a picture that's in the room of Frank Vanderlip, Nelson Aldrich, who was Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller's maternal grandfather, Paul Warburg, Benjamin Strong. These people were representative of the Rockefellers family, the Morgan family, the Warburg family, the Rothschild family. People who together controlled probably somewhere between a third to half of the wealth in the planet at that time. They sat there in that room for 2 weeks and they planned the Federal Reserve, figured out the name Federal Reserve, which makes it sound like it's part of the government, which it's not. It is a private corporation owned by them. And then they spent a week figuring out how they were going to get it passed. Their strategy worked beautifully. Half of them backed Teddy Roosevelt to split the Republican vote in half. And the other Republicans voted for Taft, who was anti-bank. And they got Woodrow Wilson in, who was their pawn, who signed the Federal Reserve Bill in 1913. Does that sound like bottom up to you? Or does that sound like top down? I think it's pretty clear, and we were hoodwinked, and the American people had no idea what was going on. By the way, that meeting, the knowledge of that meeting was held in secret. They used aliases. All the people who went there used aliases when they went there, and they carried shotgun bags, to make it look like they were going on a hunting trip. So it was all done in the utmost secret. It didn't come out until years later when several of them wrote about it in their diaries or magazine articles. But when you're in that room, it says right in that room, it said the Federal Reserve was created here. It has that picture up there, and you're sitting in the room where that was created. Conspiracy theory goes out the window when you're sitting in that room, and you realize it's conspiracy fact. Okay? One more letter on that, and this is so prescient and perceptive, far-sighted, whatever you want to call it, by Jefferson, who basically explained what's going on in the last couple of years in this country in 1802. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. So we talk about bottom-up monetary policy in the book. I recommend that we have a constitutional amendment that says no private banking institution can be created by our government. They cannot defer that to a private group, that there should be no legal tender laws. Legal tender laws drive fiat currency. In other words, when you have a legal tender law says you cannot use any currency other than what we tell you you can use. And that's how they drive these fiat currencies. This new bill by Dennis Kucinich, I don't know if you've heard about it or not. Anybody here heard about that? Basically would get rid of the Federal Reserve. Great. It would get rid of fractional reserve banking, where the banks can lend more money than they actually have on deposit. That's great. But then it would allow the government to create a fiat currency with legal tender laws, and this panel of 9 congressmen and senators would have control over the monetary system, and we would still have paper money and still have a fiat currency. I think it's basically taking a pack of wolves and trading it for a pack of hyenas, okay? You don't want anybody, even any power elite, to control our currency or to allow the legal tender laws to be there. Let the people decide what currency they want to use. We'll have a free market decide what kind of currency we have. I need your help on that. I need all of you to join the Republic and help me. I'm on the Monetary Committee on the Republic, and we're having this discussion right now. Welfare, I'm just going to mention 72% of the money that we collect in this country for social welfare programs goes and stays in Washington, D.C. This is by the government's own numbers, by Martin Gross. This is research. Amazing. We could save 72% of the money we spend on social welfare programs by eliminating the bureaucracy and just getting a list of all the recipients and sending them a check every month. Just hire a bookkeeper to send out those checks, and we save 72%. This is how bureaucracy works. Bottom up is the only way to help people get out of poverty. I read this amazing book that I just want to mention to you, Renewing American Compassion by Marvin Olasky. And what he does in there is he studies what the system is now compared to what the system was before the federal government got involved in welfare. It's an amazing book. And basically, he shows how well it was handled, how well these problems were handled in the local level by private organizations, which, by the way, when a private organization raises money for a typical charity, say Habitat for Humanity or Salvation Army, 80% of the money goes to the recipients and 20% goes to the organization for money raising and bureaucracy. So it's just flipped from what the federal government does. Environment, my quote there was Robert Kennedy saying that the federal government is the largest polluter in our country. Basically, my whole concept there is that the government is a very, very poor steward of the environment. Right now, in my opinion, I've been involved with the environment since 1972. I was an automotive ecologist in 1972. I've been involved with the environment in many different aspects all these years. And the government is the worst polluter, and the government has sovereign immunity. If you work for the government, or you work for a private contractor that works for the government, and you destroy a lake, let's say, and people die from drinking the water in that lake, you are immune. There is no responsibility because of sovereign immunity of the government. And the corporations have this because the guys who make the bad decisions there are protected by the corporate shield in terms of immunity. We need to eliminate all that. If somebody makes a mistake, they need to pay. And that's the real solution to our environmental problem, is bring back common law and grand juries, and if people create damage to someone else, they have to compensate. That would clean up 90% of the environmental problems in this country if compensation and restitution had to be paid by whoever was responsible for creating the damage. Bottom-up solution again. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the solution. Fundamentally, what's happened is from 1787 to 1860, we had a lot of freedom in this country. The Civil War was a watershed in terms of the things that happened during that time that started to take away our freedom and our liberty. And it still didn't affect, I mean, there was so much freedom. The momentum of the freedom in this country still continued for decades after that. But things that were put in place in 1860 to 1871 made a huge impact later on. And so from that essential time, from 1776 to 1860, we had a real, free, true republic. 1860 to 2009, it's been diminishing freedom. And 2010, it's time to turn it back, and now we have the republic, which was formed last year, repopulating the republic in all 50 states, grand juries being formed in counties all over the country, thousands and thousands of people all over the country joining this organization, and it's the most amazing thing I've seen in 25 years of working for restructuring our country in terms of our founding principles. So I'm very excited about it. I just joined a few months ago. People in Florida saw fit to vote me in as a congressman in Florida, and I've been involved now actively for about 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 weeks. So basically the solution is to re-inhabit the republic lawfully, peacefully, non-coercion, and the vehicle, the foundation for that is our founding documents, as I said before. The purpose of tonight is to educate, first of all, because people are going to have to be educated. They're going to have to understand these principles. That's why I'm doing these seminars, so people understand the fundamental principles and they understand what we're doing with this republic and how it can benefit them and how it can benefit their families and their children and their grandchildren. The first step, remember we talked about declaring, the importance of declaring your indigenous power. We ask people that are joining the republic to sign what's called a declaration declaring your sovereign rights held by indigenous power. That's the first step. If you want to take the step of really helping get this thing going, we ask you to join the grand jury and be part of that. And tonight you'll be able to sign up for both of those if you wish. We signed up a bunch of people today in Hills, a bunch of people in Davenport last night, and people are really responding to this. You've all seen this movie, The Matrix, right? The Matrix, Neo began to realize that there was something seriously wrong with what his reality was. And he met Morpheus, and Morpheus said, you know, I can take the red pill or the blue pill. If you take the red pill, you're going to know everything, and there's no turning back. Are you sure you want this red pill? And so that's kind of what we're doing tonight. We're kind of taking it back, and we're giving you truth about what's really happening, and most people don't understand a lot of this. And we invite you, we're going to go through just a rough outline of what's happened to our republic, how it's been turned into a corporation and a different form of government than what our founders created. And we invite you to do your own research. The republicofiowa.org website has an excellent history of all this on there. I invite you to read that. And then there's other sources that I'm going to give you tonight that will help you. So let's take the red pill here and go through some of this. First of all, the United States exists in two forms. The original United States has been usurped by a corporation called the United States Corporation, which was incorporated in the District of Columbia in 1871. Now, the first kind of public expression we have from government that this kind of exists was this Supreme Court case in 1901. Marshall Harlan was a Supreme Court justice. This was a dissenting opinion in a case called Downs versus Bidwell. This is what he says in there. Very, very interesting. The idea prevails with some. Indeed, it found expression in arguments at the bar. In other words, this idea that he's going to state here has been discussed in the courts among the legal community, that we have in this country substantially or practically two national governments. One to be maintained under the Constitution and with all its restrictions, and the other to be maintained by Congress outside and independently of that instrument, which he goes on to say would be just like all the other nations on the earth, without restrictions and without attachment to higher law. And he says in there that if that were to happen, he feels it would be very bad because it would, we'd go from an era of constitutional liberty guarded and protected by a written constitution into an era of legislative absolutism. But I think this is a very important thing to see because a Supreme Court justice is talking about this. So this was starting to be implemented more and more at that time. So let's go through some of the timelines here. 1788, the United States was officially bankrupt. 1790, Article 1 of the U.S. Statutes at Large, pages 138 to 178, abolished the states of the Republic and created federal district, corporations, and made us corporations, made us corporate citizens. It's a different status than an individual sovereign human being. So this started way back. Now the impact of it didn't come in until much, much later, but it started back then. 1845, Congress passed legislation that would ultimately allow common law to be usurped by admiralty law. Again, common law is based in natural law or divine law. It's non-changing. It's a higher law. And admiralty law is corporate law. It's changing. It's like ruler's law. It can be changed by whoever's in charge. So that didn't immediately take place, but the first step was in 1845. 1860 was a very, very important time. In 1860, when the South left the Union, there was not a quorum. The Congress could not legally meet. So what did they do? 1861, Lincoln declared a national emergency and martial law, which gave the president unprecedented powers. That, by the way, has never been. I've actually read a Senate report on this, and this one and the Roosevelt did the similar thing in '33. Those have never been repealed, and that Senate report verifies that. I read that at the Continental Congress because I was on the committee for the War Powers Act. 1863, the Lieber Code was established, taking away your property and your rights. So this was the first step in basically taking our property in order to get out of bankruptcy with the bankers. And at this step here, it was the public lands that were used as collateral. From 1864 to 1867, several Reconstruction Acts were passed, forcing the states to ratify the 14th Amendment, which made everyone slaves. If you read the 14th Amendment and you go back there, it talks about privileges, not rights, but privileges. Instead of really freeing the blacks and the slaves, it made all of us slaves. In 1871, the United States became a corporation with a new constitution and a new corporate government. This is when the incorporation took place in District of Columbia. In 1917, the Trading with the Enemy Act, this is a very important thing, was passed. Now, in 1917, it was done because we were at war, in World War I. It was passed so that we could confiscate the lands of our enemies. And it made anybody who was in the country who owned land and was part of Germany or Italy or the other countries we were fighting, it classified them as enemy combatants. Well, in 1933, Roosevelt wanted to confiscate all of our gold. The way that they could legally do that was by reclassifying every single person in this country as an enemy combatant. And that's exactly what they did. And that remains the case today. We are classified, all of us, as enemy combatants. And they then also collateralized the private lands of the people, a lien, and they borrowed money against our private lands. And that's when property taxes started. We don't own our land. Just try this experiment. Don't pay your property taxes for 3 months and see who ends up with your land. If you owned your land, you wouldn't have to pay taxes on it, and you wouldn't be able to have the government confiscate it at the point of a gun, which is what they can do. 1944, Washington, D.C. was deeded to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, by the Bretton Woods Agreement. The IMF is made up of extremely wealthy problem that own most of the banking industries of the world. You can go back to that picture I showed you earlier. The same people, Morgans, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Warburgs, and others. Congress, the IRS, and the President work for the IMF. The IRS is not a U.S. government agency. It's an agency of the International Monetary Fund. Our elected officials are supposed to operate under limits of their own, of their oath of office to uphold the U.S. state constitutions, but they ignore that. Our founding fathers look, and by the way, there's many instances. It used to be a few years ago. You weren't sure about this, but now you can go to courts all the time and you can hear the judges actually say, if somebody tries to bring up the Constitution in defense, the Constitution does not apply here. They will say that. Our founding fathers look back to history for precedent. What they found was a Magna Carta, the Great Charter of Freedoms. It set a precedent that changed the face of England forever by establishing that the king was not above the law. The common law is very different from statutory law. Now, I've mentioned that statutory law is ruler's law. The ruler can change the law anytime they want. In our country, whoever's in power can change the laws, and whoever's in power the next election, they can change it back. When that happens, people can't make decisions. That's one of the main reasons people are leaving this country with their manufacturing and their industry, because they don't know what law is coming next. Who's going to be in charge? You know, it's just not a stable environment to do business in. Now, I want to mention this book. It's called Whatever Happened to Justice by Richard Maybury. After you read Common Sense Revisited, which I hope you'll read, but by the way, you're all going to get a copy of that if you don't already have it tonight for free. You can buy more for $1 a copy and give them to your friends. I have hundreds of copies here. The next book should be this one, in my opinion. Whatever Happened to Justice by Richard Maybury. He explains the source of common law. He explains the difference between common law and ruler's law, and what the founders were thinking when they created our country. It's just an awesome, awesome book. Very well researched, easy to understand. He wrote all of his books so that an 8th grade level educated person could understand them very clearly. So very powerful. I'm on my second reading on this. I carry it with me. It's a fantastic book. And basically what he says is that over hundreds of years, the common law was reduced to 2 fundamental principles. Do all that you have agreed to do, and do not encroach on other persons or their property. As long as you follow those rules, you're okay. When you break those rules, then something has to be done, and restitution needs to be paid. Now, another neat thing about common law is there is no crime if there is no victim. Think about that for a minute. How many people are we locking up every single day, putting in a jail, putting in a cage to live years of their lives that have never harmed anyone? All those people should be released. And they will be once we repopulate this republic. People who have not harmed another person, have not stolen from another person, they will be released. And a lot more of the people that are in there that could be paying restitution to their victims, but we're locking them up. And not only do we not get repaid if we've been harmed by somebody, but we have to pay to feed them. What is it, $70,000, $80,000 a year, I think? Something like that. $70,000 to $80,000 a year it costs to put a person in prison and pay for them, taxpayer money. And those people could be out, if they're nonviolent, they could be out paying restitution to whoever they've harmed. That should be done, and that will be done under the Republic. Our jails will be maybe 10% of the people that are in there will be in there. And the rest of the people will be out leading productive lives. If they've been violent or they threaten violence, they may have to stay in jail. Just a couple things here on power and government. Our founders really, really understood. They studied power. They were all very, very concerned about keeping this republic a republic, protecting individual rights. They did everything they could that they knew to do. But they also understood that power corrupts, and power corrupts absolutely. But even more than that, what happens is, like this one quote here, the third one down, power attracts the corruptible. Absolute power attracts the absolutely corruptible. The more power a government entity has, the more it's going to attract people who want to use that power for their own benefit. And the founders understood this very clearly. That's why they wanted to keep state and federal government very, very small, because they knew if it was, the more it did, the more power it had, the more it would try to take over. And then Jefferson, the second quote on Jefferson is really important, because Jefferson understood power so well, he knew that even he couldn't be trusted with it. So he said, if once the people become inattentive to the public affairs, you and I, and Congress and assemblies and judges and governors shall all become wolves. It seems to be the law of our general nature in spite of individual exceptions. He realized that even he couldn't be trusted. In other words, the only safeguard was the constant vigilance of the people. What he calls here attentiveness. People need to be attentive to any surrogate that they create. I think the most important book you can read is Creature from Jekyll Island, Second Look at the Federal Reserve by G. Edward Griffin, the man pictured here. it's a book that everyone needs to read because it really tells the whole story. I don't have time to go into all the details of how this is structured, but he explains how this happened, who has what to gain by destroying this country and destroying the founding principles it was based on. Because it's been a concerted effort to put us into a situation where our power is reduced as a nation, our power is reduced as individuals, and the power of the international government is increased. And that is a concerted effort by the same group of people who created the Federal Reserve. Mr. Griffin and I became friends when we were speaking together in Las Vegas a few years ago, actually back in the 90s. And he would speak at 9 o'clock in the morning at this educational conference that we had every month. And then I would speak after him, this talk I did on the history of taxes and civilization. And then we would have till 5 o'clock till we were on a panel together to talk. And we talked about how these groups that, created international government and are intent upon destroying America and American sovereignty, what their motivation is. They're already extraordinarily wealthy, extraordinarily powerful. But he said a couple things. One, people who are powerful want more power. It is a drug. It is just like a drug. And the other thing is they're bred and educated to believe that they are an elite and that they deserve to rule, and that you and I are just like sheep. We're like animals that need to be ruled. We can't be trusted to run this world without them. And this is a quote from Edward L. Bernays, who is considered the father of modern public relations. He lived for 100 years. He invented scientific polls, or polls to be used as propaganda for trying to get affect public opinion with polls. All these things. The big lie theory, that was Edward L. Bernays. He taught that to Goebbels and Hitler. He was an aide, an advisor to them during World War II. Very powerful man, lived for a long time, very influential, and one of the ruling elite. And he felt that the leaders needed to protect the people from their primitive animal-like selves. Their role to create man-made gods who assert subtle social control to bring order out of chaos. So that's how a lot of these people think. And America was based on the idea that we didn't need ruling elites telling us how to live our lives, that the people knew how to live their own lives, and that the power should be with the people at the local level. So, in our republic, we basically believe a couple of things. These are fundamental basic beliefs that almost are universal within the people that are joining this republic. And one is that we believe that the Declaration of Independence and our founding documents as conceived, if administered as conceived, would return America back to a freedom and prosperity that cannot be fully comprehended today. We believe at this point in history it's we the people who can save our nation, and we need to save it one by one from the bottom up. And the key is reestablishing the common law-based grand juries in every county. And that's what's happening. That's what's really exciting about this movement. The grand juries can do a whole lot. I want to talk a little bit about common law. First of all, there's 99 counties in Iowa. The immediate goal is to establish these grand juries in each county. This is not the kind of jury duty that you're trying to get out of, okay? This is a completely different thing. These grand juries are the laws, are the courts of the people. They were invented a long time ago to stand between a ruthless tyrant, king or queen or whatever, and the people, and protect them from arbitrary rule and arbitrary law. And if you want to become a juror, there's a jural covenant that we would ask you to sign. It needs to be witnessed by 3 people. And it's a very serious thing, being part of the grand jury. The Fifth Amendment is what gives us the right to have a grand jury as it existed in common law. But you have to know, you have to understand that 50, 60 years ago, the grand jury was common in every state. Grand juries, common law grand juries. They've been pretty well wiped out of most states. And, but it is our right under the Fifth Amendment to create these grand juries. And even if they've changed their state constitution to say that they don't need a grand jury, that doesn't take away our right, common law right, to have a grand jury. This is what some people are saying about the grand juries that want to get rid of them. Quote, under modern conditions, a grand jury is antiquated, superfluous, and well-nigh useless. Obviously, that's coming from people that are proponents of ruler's law. They don't want the grand juries, but they can't stop us from creating them. Joining the Republic of the United States of America, if you just want to join and sign the form called Declaration of Sovereign Rights held by Indigenous Power, that's great. If you want to take the next step and become a juror, then you sign the Jural Covenant. A few of the benefits you can expect once our republic is fully established: no more income taxes. The Constitution says no direct taxes. There can be no income tax. No more property taxes. That's a direct tax too. No more fiat worthless money. Freedom to travel. Freedom to be born and married without a license, government number, or registration. No more victimless crime. Perpetrators must restore their victims' losses, restitution. No more encroachments by government on your unalienable rights, and much, much, much more. But that's just a taste of what it would be like when we restore our republic. So, just a couple points of review on Indigenous power. It's that source of Indigenous power that is that aspect of you that is universal. It's our true soul. It is divine love in its essence. The knowledge of this truth is basic to all traditions. It's universal. An individual acting from a state of fully developed Indigenous power is invincible. Sovereign individual. When we have these rights, we need to be responsible. With rights and freedom goes responsibility. If we're going to have more freedom, people are going to have to act very responsibly. You're going to have to be responsible to help people in their communities, because we don't want government to take on that role. We want to be able to do it ourselves in a non-coercive manner. So all of those of us in the restored public offer to all Americans true liberty, freedom, justice for all, and the full restoration of their Indigenous power. We offer this to you now. You're invited to join the Republic. And this is the last statement in Common Sense Revisited. When the power of love exceeds the love of power, the world will know peace, prosperity, and freedom. Creative solutions to our problems will occur spontaneously and naturally from the bottom up. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for listening.